Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to start the youth panel discussion. I'm Cebisa Luzipho, and unlike my fellow panelists here, I am not in the conservation space. I'm actually in public relations and communications. But I think what we've heard throughout the conference is that storytelling is a big part of what we're trying to do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my panel as well as the question. So to the left of me, I have Sina, I then have Savanna, Antony, and Terry. So we need to look at youth perspectives about reinventing the future. Africa is expected to surpass Asia in becoming the world's fastest growing region. However, climate change poses a substantial risk to the continent, capable of undermining development, erasing progress unless we find a suitable and robust response. The focus of this panel discussion is to dive into the pivotal question how we can effectively strategize for the well-being of people, places, and planet while pursuing our developmental ambitions. We need to be able to highlight the unique youth perspective who are expected to inherit the socio-ecological outcomes that stem from the decisions we enact today. We also need to explore opportunities for change that will shape sustainable socio-economic and socio-ecological trajectories. So without further ado, I want each of my panelists to have a few minutes to sort of dive into that very long question, but in the beginning, I want us to discuss how does climate change, biodiversity loss, and a growing pressure on environmental resources hamper Africa's development?
Should I start?
Please go.
Okay. All right. I will respond to the question based on my field experience working with UCN and GIZ in the WAP complex in West Africa. To begin with, I was assigned to kind of understand the patterns and the determinants of wild habitat encroachments by local communities, especially farmers. And the first identified pattern was the rapidly growing human population. So according to farmers, they reported that they have now like more people to feed, and they are left with like very limited option. So for me, like we should see like the rapidly human growing population also as an opportunity, as we are the youngest continent. And I do believe in the potential of local youth, indigenous youth, to bring a transformative change that we all are looking for. When like it's projected that, for example, human population will increase by will quadruple by 2100, according to the United Nations, and this means like we will have like the demand for food will increase, and this will have like kind of a direct implication for our land system. So, for example, in the forest region in Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, and Cameroon, smallholders increase their cultivated area by 3.3% annually between 1988 and 2007, causing 2.3 million hectares of forest loss. So knowing that we Africans, we are very demanding in terms of what we are eating and everything, the question we should ask ourselves now is, how are we going to produce and to feed population by having like less impact on biodiversity? And with respect to biodiversity, hunting and also harvesting of natural resources are also having like a great impact on wildlife population. One of my tasks before was also to assess wildlife population in the WAP complex in West Africa by using camera trapping. So I was very shocked when I heard like after collecting data, I was like, let me just get the perspective of local communities. So I was really shocked when I heard they say that, okay, hunting, harvesting are part of our identity, and there is no way for us to leave it. So it's like this poses a very serious issue, right, for our biodiversity, for how we gonna tackle the issue for the future generation. So just for an example, since 2007, illegal trade in ivory has doubled, and forest elephant populations declined by 62% between 2002 and 2011. So hunting kind of occurs in many of the national parks, having like serious implication on the country economy. And like a country, like for my country in Benin, we mainly base our economy on tourist income. So you understand that this will have like impact on how the country and everything will develop. So thank you.
Quite interesting, because our next panelist is going to talk about wildlife economies. So I'm very interested to hear your views, Savanna.
Yeah, so I'm here representing the African Wildlife Economy Institute. And as you might have heard from some of the other speakers over the last 2 days, like Wiseman and Glovu and Francis Faris, we need to start harnessing what Africa is known for. We are known for our animals, we are known for our plants. So how can we harness that from which we are best known for to try and better the livelihoods of communities? Those days where we have nature protected areas and you have to drive hours out to go and see them to really see what all of this is about is over. We need to start bridging that gap and bringing the two together to really start making a change. And we, not just on a ground level, but also on a governmental, on a policy level, which comes in with certifying wildlife enterprises, certifying the products that we are using, like wild meats, the kudus, the impalas, the baobabs, all those sorts of things. Sure.
Well, we're talking about the impact of climate change here. Let me try to paint a picture. In 2016, Kasese District Local Government in Uganda experienced a flood around April. That flood destroyed a road that led to a hospital, washed part of the hospital, and a school. The local government had to reallocate resources that could go into education and health to address that emergency. It means that those essential sectors were deprived of the services that could provide. In the very same year, in September, there was a drought that pushed the district to the brink of famine. Now, the district is 80%, more than 80% smallholder farmers, and that loss of livelihood caused so much stress in the area because, first of all, the government wasn't able to provide the essential services people needed, free education, health, and all that, and the parents could not afford to cater for those services from the private sector because their livelihoods were lost. I think climate change robs the institutions of the capacity to deal with the problems of the people and robs the people of the capacity to address those problems themselves. It basically pushes everyone at a limbo, and everyone has to find a way to survive. That's why it's so important for us to pick it up from here and find a way out of this mess.
So in addition to the more direct harms that Antony just mentioned, among other panelists, there's also kind of, I feel, in structural and systemic forms where the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and degradation is kind of like used to legitimize some of the policies and actions that are in less favor of the marginalized categories. And this is a really common example, especially in the more strict conservation spaces, where a lot of times communities, their dependencies on the forest services are kind of like used or kind of like labeled as a threat to the system, which then kind of justifies the different forms of means that are used to kind of like exclude them. And that doesn't really sit so well with the conservation imperatives, because then it has like a ripple effect of sort of protests or different forms of conflicts that are not really supporting the conservation objectives. That's how I see it.
It seems that we need to look at different solutions for the development of Africa. You guys have posed sort of like differing opinions. And it also feels like that while we're worried about the effects of climate change, it's very hard to be innovative and creative. Which brings me to my next question, because we still need to think of these innovations. We still need to think about our way out. And particularly the youth has to be involved in this thought process. So how do we effectively then strategize the well-being of our continent while pursuing developmental ambitions? Africa, as I said in the beginning, is projected to surpass Asia. We need to be thinking about the future. How can we do that with the issues that we're currently faced with?
Currently, it's obvious that given that the urgency of the climate change problem, development partners, all of us here, have to work with the people with the authority and in positions to make the change. But if at all we are to sustain those changes, we have to find a way of bringing the future leaders, the youth today, and the younger generation tomorrow into these spaces. But how do you do that? You know? I'd like to bring this back to the audience. Everyone in the audience is passionate about something. How do you cultivate that passion in the next generation? Someone young who looks up to you, so that person can be able to pick up what you started and move forward. Some of us youth have small families. It's our responsibility to do that as well. So we cannot just leave it to the generation. This is everyone's responsibility. And for even the people viewing at home, everyone should do their part.
Savanna, do you want to bring in wildlife economies, sort of understanding of youth-driven and youth-involved initiatives when we strategize about these solutions?
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed from Hector Magome's talk yesterday was that concept of internalized conservation, which I feel is really relevant in my life growing up in wildlife reserves and in the Kruger National Park. And a really amazing company that I know of, apart from African Wildlife Economy Institute, is Lessons in Conservation. And they're actually busy on a journey traveling from Cape to Kilimanjaro, visiting small communities and teaching children why conservation is important. Why are we spending all of our time doing this research or being in the bush, restoring landscapes, reintroducing species into their natural habitats, showing them what it's all about, creating that internalized conservation. And with the Wildlife Economy Institute, you know, we're a think tank. We are trying to generate that really impactful research that can be used in the field, that can be used on the ground. And it's not just generating the research, but it's also aiding governments and changing their policies to be able to make wildlife enterprises happen. How can we, not just South Africa, but all African countries, in their interconnectedness, it needs to be easier for us to be able to get these enterprises out there, to be able to harness it, to uplift our communities, get them involved, use their indigenous knowledge systems within those aspects.
Yeah, so I think I like the idea of creativities in these spaces and trying to engage kind of like younger people in this. But it's one thing to be creative, but also it's another thing to actually integrate these creativities into the spaces and structures that support or transform. So I guess maybe my question, and not just to you, but also like to the audience out there, I just want to know, maybe just ask, do we have like spaces in the structures for young people to actually take up the changes of spaces? I mean, you can just maybe think about it, but from my experience, just like from what I've seen, there isn't a lot of this kind of like examples or the case. It's not the case yet, because apart from the triple challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and blah, 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 the other problems facing the continent, one of them is kind of like ageism and a bit of non-adaptive kind of like policies. So ageism in the sense that we have like a bit of an aging leadership in the continent, right? So in the sense that old leaders are looking down upon young people as not having the wisdom or experience to actually affect these changes yet. I feel like young people can be trained to do so, right? And so I think a lot of presentations yesterday also talked about the role of leadership in future kind of like changes we want. So we're talking about that, yet we don't have trust in the young people to actually take up and drive these changes. So I'm just really curious, how do you do this? And also the question of non-adaptive policies also in the sense that we have older people, older generation tend to think or feel a certain way about what needs to happen, but also at the same time not being open to other ways of changing or changing quickly enough, especially against the the backdrop of changing technology, to actually look at other ways of changing. So then we're blocking ways for alternative options or visions or younger visions, but also at the same time talking about leadership that needs to happen in the future. What are we talking about really? So I just want to also throw that out there to the audience, just to also think about the kind of leadership you're talking about, but also how do we then talk about creativity and then leadership in the same space and then make it happen? Yeah.
Very interesting, because we all know this. We do have an unaging leadership, right? There's a cap, and young people almost have to wait a few decades before they find their seat at the table. How does that look like if we are then supposed to imagine a future that we're both currently living in and a future that we want our children to inherit? So if young people do not have a seat at the table, if we cannot impact decisions, if we are just involved but are not leading certain initiatives, how are we then going to tackle the socio-ecological issues that we are inheriting? What are some of those issues that we are inheriting? And do we have enough power or enough say to think of innovative and creative ways out of current phenomena?
Right.
Okay. There is no single future, and we cannot achieve the one we want by ignoring the main role played by indigenous knowledge and indigenous people. And that's what I'm doing right now, right? I'm just investigating how we can use indigenous knowledge from local communities to create that desirable future for local people and marine ecosystem in West Africa. So it means I will be, working closely with indigenous people and collect, assess the knowledge that is available there, and then use future methods to see how we can use that knowledge to inform future and then to make decisions about future. And just a very quick example, because I believe in the potential of indigenous people, believe in the potential of indigenous knowledge, not because I'm from Benin, but because I saw the application of indigenous knowledge. I saw how people got good result by applying such knowledge. And to quickly put an example, where I'm from, my community, there was that tree we call Iroko. I think it's Milicia excelsa in the scientific name. And it was under pressure. So for the community to kind of respond to that pressure from human pressure on that tree, they just quickly invite local youth, indigenous youth, and they're like, okay, because Iroko, it's a very large tree that can live up to 500 years, so it's a very large tree. So for us, it's okay, let's just put something on that tree so that people don't go there and then cut them, so that the cutting will stop, actually. So okay, we just name that tree. They named that tree the wicked tree. So it means if you touch that tree, bad things or funny things will happen to you. So that's kind of reduce the pressure on that tree. And I'm not saying that we all should start now naming all trees wicked trees, but just highlighting local thinking in in reducing pressure on natural resources.
I like the idea of looking to the past for future solutions. Antony, what's your take on the question?
I like Sena's example of passing knowledge to the young generation. And then it brings me to the context of who is responsible for passing that knowledge. Yesterday we spoke a lot, I had so many speakers talk about participation, communities, the power of individuals, groups, and all this. I'd like to take it a note lower to the family level, because my experience is mainly with smallholder farmers, and these farmers exist in households. So every time we engage them, we've been working with a household head who is responsible for the farm. But the question, if you engage this household head, and for some reason the children are not usually at home, they're in school, or the slightly older one, the young youth, if they're not in school, have gotten married, this knowledge remains with this household head. They're the custodians of this experience that you've passed on to them. I feel that it's important to move a step further. I'm not suggesting this as a complete solution. We shall have to keep thinking and consulting about this. But I suggest that one of the things would be to make the youth and the children part of the beneficiary pool in this system, so that they know the value of indigenous knowledge and how it actually contributes to their lives. If at all you're working on a livelihood intervention program, we have to work with communities in such a way that the parents find a way of engaging the children and the people whom they intend to leave this responsibility to. A number of times we've seen children selling the property of parents after they've died. So you spend years working with a specific farmer, then the moment they pass on, a few months later, you hear that the son has sold the land and moved to the city, found themselves a different job or something else. So this is a problem we have to deal with, because no matter which angle we look at it, all of us come from families. And if at all we address a problem at that level, I believe that the value systems in the society generally are going to be positive. If at all we are able to pass our passions, our values, our love for conservation to the next generation, then we shall have a generation of youth that are forward-thinking and could save the world even when we are not here.
So as Sina mentioned in the beginning, Africa, I think we all know, is the youngest continent. And so in terms of age, it almost feels impossible to think of sustainable ways of reimagining the future of our continent without involving the youth. It's not just in manpower.
Yeah.
It's not just in filling seats and being spectators. We need to be part of the decision makers. I want to explore sort of high-level solutions in the fields you're currently in that could help tackle this enormous task, right? What does, when we talk about the future of Africa, what does sustainable growth mean to you, and what does being it youth-led or youth-involved mean?
Can I just respond to in relation to what Antony just said and Sina? Yeah. So just in terms of how passing down the knowledge systems down. I've got a bit of a curiosity around this, especially against the world we live now, how we kind of like constantly modernizing. And that means that we see younger people moving more and more to the cities, which means younger people are increasingly becoming decoupled from these systems that are supposed to be supportive in future. And again, the role of indigenous knowledge systems kind of came up a lot in most of yesterday's presentations. And so, I mean, this is kind of like a form of epistemicide if you think about it. And then, because then we kind of end up valuing other more like imported knowledge systems and then looking down upon our own, which is supposed to be really the one things creating enabling conditions for some of the tipping points talked about yesterday. So then how do we then kind of like reconcile that disconnect between we are modernizing in that wave, but then in that wave we're also kind of losing the key things that we need to actually kind of develop as young people in the future? How do you do that, right? And so, again, just throwing this out there to the audience. I like asking questions, by the way, so you can think about them or just respond later. But I'm just really curious around this topic, right? But to your question, a high-level response in this case would be, and this is also speaking to my work, which is kind of like trying to incorporate justice into the eco-transformation space. So what's coming up is kind of like the role of funding of philanthropy in the conservation space, in the sense that the funding foundations have fundamental role in shaping either harmful or useful ways of conservation, right? And so, and this is especially compelling against the increasing philanthropies, especially in Africa. If you look at the 30 by 30 agreement, for example, there's lots of this happening, right? And so, so the agenda setting is really important if we are to talk about a future that is much more kind of like justice and more acceptable, or kind of like moral, or morally acceptable, something like that. And in cases where this has been more successful, it has been also attributed to some of the points that came up too during presentation about like the agenda setting as being more of a co-created process as opposed to agendas being set for you and then you're told to do things that do not align with your reality or stuff like that. So that's what I was saying.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, you know, with this youthful generation, we are the generation of technology. We are in the middle of a technological revolution at the moment, and I think that is something that we bring to the table quite strongly. It is something that we've grown up with. We've been basically indoctrinated into it our entire lives. And I think solutions such as what we've seen today, like camera trapping, which, you know, is an amazing tool being used in anti-rhino poaching, that giving us a seat at the table, lowering those requirements of being able to even get to the table. Instead of waiting 5-10 years to build up experience, give us the experience, give us that opportunity. The foundation has been laid by everyone in this room. That knowledge has been created, and now we can take that and we can run with that, adapt that, and try and make a change.
Most of my work at the university now is on enabling conditions that reinforcing feedback loops that could drive adoption towards tipping points. So I would like to come from that angle, say that what is it that is limiting the youth from participation in all these spaces? What are the barriers they're facing? So that if we could come together and either minimize or eliminate those barriers and open the door for them, I'm confident that we shall be able to draw a number of youth in. And of course, there are different ways of doing this. We could work with different youth groups, communities, and all that. But then there's the role of policy as well. I know that there are some studies that were done in the US about how children influence the parents' opinion about climate change, and I think the same can be done in the conservation space, so education is a key part. So institutions and all this I believe, if we listen to everything that everyone has been talking about here, most people have mentioned what can help. Can we find a way of collecting that knowledge and then try moving beyond that to actually implementing some of these practices? Otherwise, it will all remain here. So much has been said, and I feel that the answers are all within this room, in the presentations that have already been made and the ones that will be made tomorrow.
Now, would you like to close that off?
Yeah, from the perspective of what I'm doing now, I would say policymakers and implementers need to include the voice of local youth, their knowledge when they are implementing their policy or they are developing their policy. This is very crucial because like creating a future is not like, it should be, we need to hear those people that sometimes don't have the voice. Like, we need kind of, the voiceless needs to be heard. And when it's come to that process, indigenous people are kind of left behind. So we should create that space to allow like everyone to put their contribution into the creation of that future we all want.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give the audience time for some questions, but I think what's quite important that we've heard from our panel here is that the youth want to have a more significant voice. They don't necessarily feel that they need to wait 10 to 15 to 20 years until they're heard. And then more so, we need to find ways to engage youth, particularly in environments like this. A very interesting stat is that 46% of the people that are attending the conference are younger than 35. So we are speaking to the youth. The youth is involved. And as you know, Antony has said, the solutions are here, but are they getting the opportunity to be able to implement these solutions instead of waiting for 10 or 15 or 20 years before their voices are exalted to a point where they can be heard. So I'm going to open up to the floor, and someone's going to pass around the mic for any questions.
Cebisa, I'd like to put a challenge to the youth themselves. The question was asked, how do we fit in? So most indigenous knowledge systems are verbal. They're passed down from father to son and daughter, mother, so on and so forth. So being verbal, a lot of them are lost. A lot of the traditions that have gone before all communities have gone. Now you guys are in the digital age, the age of information. The young man, I get to call you young man, from Guinea. There are things that you're learning, lady from South Africa, things that you're learning, and the rest of you. And because you live in a digital age, if you guys are documenting the indigenous knowledge systems, you can communicate amongst yourselves better than our generation and the generation before us could ever have done. So you might actually have the solution to a lot of these climate mitigation strategies purely by taking the old systems, coordinating them, and coming up with a solution.
Anyone like to comment to that?
Yeah, I think obviously with this digital age, we also need to be really careful around it, as social media, there's a lot of fake news that goes around, and an example of trusted media sources are publications. Everything that goes into a publication, it gets fact-checked. And that is where we should be documenting this, not just on our Instagrams, our Facebooks, and Twitters, because a lot of that information can be lost, can get twisted around. So I think we really need to harness those stories, capture those stories into hard copy works, where that can then be shared around and taught to the younger generations.
Can I just add to that a little bit? And I think you're right, we can do that and it's possible. And I can point to one of the projects that the Center for Sustainability Transition did in 2021, where they were trying to kind of like capture the different visions of young people in Southern Africa to actually get their visions of futures of natures. And it was actually really amazing what came out of that, right? So different kinds of creativities that came up. So we are like young people rapping with rap songs about, you know, ecological degradation, but or young people creating collages of different cultures, or young people kind of like creating murals about all these crises. So yeah, it is possible, and we can communicate this quite effectively, right? But I think the gap in that also was that there is not enough platform to actually even showcase that. So you have all this coming up, you know, but then what then do we do with that, right? So there isn't really enough platform to take up those kind of creativities, but also support them quite, you know, so they can go up again. So, yeah.
I'd like to come at that from the angle of collaboration. That's a very important aspect you brought up. But much as the youth might have access to the tools that could set a platform for the next generation, we need the information from the previous generation to mediate that gap. So I feel that it will still boil down to conversations, intergenerational conversations and ideas, because no matter what happens, not all parents get the opportunity to pass on that knowledge to the next generation. There's so many youth out there that have already lost that connection with the previous generation. How do we ensure that the ones there now get that access?
Yeah, I will maybe add to my colleagues' points in saying that like translating the knowledge on the ground into kind of scientific publication is challenging. So we youth now, we have that responsibility to kind of look how we can otherwise like translate that knowledge, document that knowledge so that, you know, it can be like available for all of us, like for scientific and non-scientific audience.
I mean, I'd like to throw something into the hat. I think the syndication of this knowledge doesn't always have to be in a scientific publication.
Right.
Like you said, Savanna, we could use media.
Yes.
We could also use pop culture. I think a few scientists in the room are going to cringe when I say that possibly in the last 5 to 10 years, the Big Bang Theory has done a lot in telling us how actually engineers and, you know, physicists kind of like live and study. So I think there's a lot of things that we can borrow from pop culture to be able to disseminate this information. There's a lot of things that, for all the journalists that are in the room, how about instead of wanting, you know, someone that has 50 years of experience in something, seek the youth perspective. There's a saying called FUBU. It is for us, by us. And so if we want to speak to the youth, if we want to, you know, have young people hear us, then we need to be speaking to young people as well. Does anyone else have a question?
I have a question. It's a bit different from the conversation, but it can be part of the conversation. So the youth is the young people and the young generations, right? And the young researchers. And my question is on the basis of mental health. I think if you've seen the stats, you might have noticed that we have a lot of young researchers exiting the academia field because they can't take it anymore because it's so difficult. So I want to ask to the panel that if you may have experienced this, how did you manage your mental health in the space of academia? And towards the audience, I know we have some of the researchers which are some of our supervisors, and they've walked the path. So I wanted to just ask, how did you manage to keep your brain in the loop and keep the research going?
Yeah, I think, obviously, it's a big topic, but I think one of the first steps is obviously recognizing that you do need help, seeking that help, and especially with our generation, we want to destigmatize mental health as it has been in the past. We do not want it to be this thing that needs to be hush-hushed anymore. So I think if I just had to say one thing is seek that help. Do not be afraid. Ask for help. Get it.
I'd like to add to what Savanna has just said. I think what has worked for me is just being in touch. Being in touch with your friends, being in touch with family, being in touch with people you can actually trust and communicate with. Identifying such people is really, really difficult, but if you find a few of those whom you can really work with, it's always good to be in touch because you always need someone to talk to beyond recognizing that you need help. You need to find someone you can actually open up to and then work the rest of the way towards transition. That has worked for me, and it was really hard moving from Uganda, where I'm from, to the UK the first year without family, without anyone. It was really, really difficult. But talk about technology. WhatsApp exists, there is Zoom. COVID really helped with making people open to online communications. So even when family is thousands of miles away, I can call them anytime and it doesn't feel like they're very far away. So I think for me that really worked and is still working very well.
Yeah, and I just think, you know, getting back into touch with our roots, getting back into nature, getting into those conservation spaces, getting into the wildlife reserves, the national parks, just taking a drive in the Kruger Park, seeing an elephant walk by you, feeling that immense power, how small you actually feel in this world, you know, just feeling the wind on your face. It can really ground anyone really easily.
Yeah. And maybe I will just add one sentence. If you are a gym man, just go to the gym. It will help you, definitely.
And I guess mental health is also a big part of how youth is struggling across the board, right? It's not just in your field, it's across the board. Yeah. And Terry, in the beginning, you spoke about, you know, barriers that kind of, you know, block people from holding space, right, within conservation. And I think mental health is such a barrier, particularly for young people. So when we think about the work that we're doing, let's also consider the mental health of young people. Like you said, Savanna, we're trying to destigmatize mental health. It's all something that we have to participate in. As I say, we all have anxiety, we all have, you know, situational depression sometimes, but it's how, you know, the institutions we're in are creating safe spaces for young people to be able to flourish. And if young people are saying mental health is a major barrier, then we should also consider that. And not just say, oh, everyone has anxiety. It's saying, how do we then create spaces for young people that are suffering with mental health? I think I'm going to take...
Sorry, can I just add one more point? I think that's a really good question, actually, and I think it's really personal. And so I would say, I think lots of venting does help. So really vent, I think it's very useful. But also maybe tequila shots, maybe just one or two. But I think the other thing that is, I think, is also key is that being in academia is really stressful in itself. So there's lots of things coming at you at once, kind of swamping, and that can be really counterproductive. So I think it's okay to also learn how to say no and just know that it's okay, right? Because I think you do understand your work a lot of times better than other people might be with you. So I think it's okay to know when to say no, but also when to say yes. I think that has been really kind of like important for my own well-being. Yeah.
Yes. Do we have space for one more question or?
No, just one more question from me, and I may be throwing a spanner in the woodworks, but I think you did a good job in identifying the problems, a good job in identifying who needs to give the youth what, but what are the youth actually doing? Because you can't always be waiting for a hero as the youth. You can't always be waiting for someone to give you a platform. You need to create the platforms. So what's actually happening? What are the youth doing? What are the steps that you're taking as the youth?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that youth in our generation does utilize and that we make use of the most is media. We are creating awareness on all of these topics every single day. You know, we see it, whether it's the war in Ukraine or saving the whales, anti-poaching, we are getting that word out there as much as we can through the platform that we can easily access the most. So yeah.
Yeah, I like to think that the answer is already in this room. There are so many youth in this room. So many of them have already made presentations. So many of them are already taking leadership, and we are here to attest to that. It's not like we are seated waiting for things to be done. This is a negotiation, and this is the platform that we are using to put the word out.
Yeah, as he said, just really communicating how like, I'm in academia, as I mentioned, and I think I like writing, and I do tend to write in more authentic ways, and especially in the knowledge space, lots of information is lost in that process of wanting to put things in certain format that is acceptable. So I guess my role in this would be to just make sure that you communicate in a way that is much more authentic and doesn't violate what is actually going on. That's what I would say, but also like taking kind of like speak when you have to speak. That's what I say, yeah.
One more thing. I like your use of the word authentic, and that draws me to yesterday's movie session. So that links to the idea of social media and the messages that go out there, the indigenous knowledge system, authenticity. How do you in all these spaces, we have to make sure that whatever we pass on there represents the reality. There are so many opportunities to communicate, and everybody has a platform to do so. So we have to begin thinking about validity, authenticity, and the quality of the material that we share out there.
Thank you so much to my panel. I think from this panel discussion, there's a few questions that we've posed to the audience. There's a few questions we also need to start mulling over. Rindani's question in particular, that we've challenged the room, but we also need to challenge ourselves. And as we leave the stage, we need to start actively thinking about innovative and creative ways of reimagining Africa's future, particularly because it is the future that we are going to inherit, and it is the future that we are going to pass on to our children when we're no longer youth. Yeah. Thank you so much. Sorry, I have one more announcement. The JWO prize giving is going to happen at 17:15, 17:20. Could we please, around that time, make our way to the area? It is behind the pavilion. So last year, if you were here, it was in front of the pavilion, and now it's behind the pavilion. We are going to award our very brilliant winner for 2023. So yes, that is the announcement. Thank you so much.